Let me know if you've got any questions you want me to answer for you this evening. Good evening and welcome to this live Ask Me Anything About Property Investing with myself, Saj Hussain. We're live every Monday at 8:30 p.m. really to answer your property questions, ultimately to help you get further faster in your property investing journey. I'm here to share with you my 15 years of property investing experience to help you with various projects, questions, challenges you might be having right now. Do I know everything there is now about property and property investing? No, absolutely not, but there's a huge amount of experience I do have that I'm happy to share. And whichever platform you're watching on, we're live streaming on a number of them. So we're on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter. So whichever platform you're on, just pop a question in the comment section and we'll do our very best to answer that question. We probably won't be able to answer all of them, but we'll certainly do our best to work through those. So we'll get the first question up on the screen at the moment. We're in a very interesting time right now. The market's still quite heated, quite hot. There's pressure to get transactions done before stamp duty holiday finishes at the end of March. With everything going on in the economy right now, I'd say, we certainly are interested in changing times to be mindful of and be aware of as well. So let's get our first question up on the screen. I'm currently in my home office today. The weather wasn't great to be traveling over to the other office. So the first question from Jack Smith. Hi Saj, hope all is well. Have a question about student accommodation. When purchasing a property to be used for this purpose, how early would it need to be ready in order for the new students to move in? Furthermore, do you charge them even during the summer? And if it becomes unoccupied during the time, is it difficult to find replacement tenants? So Jackson, great question. Oh, there's another part of this. And other than the council tax benefit, is there any other benefits of this? I have seen places in Manchester charge £500 a room easy. Cheers. So thank you. Let's kind of break that down a little bit. First of all, just a quick caveat, I don't do any student lettings. Most of my HMOs, or pretty much all of them, apart from a small number of them, are all professional lets. We do some social housing. We're just experimenting with right now as well. But predominantly our market is professional lets, which are mostly graduates once they've left university in the early 20s. Some of them got to late 30s age range. That's our typical tenant demographic. But I have quite a few friends, even mentees, that do student housing. And from student housing point of view, you've got to get the window right in terms of when the property is available when they're moving. So usually around this time of the year, December, January, students are viewing for the next academic year, which will start later in the year in October. So your property needs to be ready for that time for them to be able to take it on. I know some people will renovate right up until September for it to be ready, but you need to be letting it now, get the commitment in place now. Otherwise, if you leave it too late, you might struggle a little bit then. So it's getting into that cycle in the first place, so you've got the window of when the tenants are looking. Then with regards to advantages, of course, it means you've got guaranteed rents over a set period of time. By that, what I mean is you'll have guarantors often, which are the parents. You'll get rent in advance for a period of time rather than getting it on a monthly basis. You can get it each term. And sometimes if you've got international students, it might even be possible to get the rent for the whole year in advance. So from a cash flow point of view, even, it puts you in a much better place. Now, again, depending on how you set up your tenancies, it may be that you pay the bills, or it might be you make the tenants responsible for the bills. They're still HMOs. It doesn't really matter who's paying the bills. It depends how you structure it. And with, as you mentioned, with tenants, they don't pay any council tax, which means that cost saving for them. And if you were paying the bills, you'd have that saving as well. Now, generally the downside is getting into the cycle in the first place, because the tenants are looking for a certain time frame, generally speaking, and also the period that you might have a void, and that void is the summer holidays. Now, I know in some places, it just depends how much demand there is and where the properties are. In some places, what you'll find is that the tenants are prepared to pay rent, or maybe even at least half rent, during the time it's empty over the summer, because they don't want to lose that property and they want to keep it. But more often than not, during that unoccupied time, you're not earning any rent. So you've got to calculate your rent maybe for the total gross rent over 10 months you collect, and then work out what the average is for the year versus collecting it for the full 12 months. That's something just to be mindful on that. I think it's certainly a good model. It's just that mine just happens to be professional tenants. That's where we're starting. That's what we've grown the business on. I would certainly not be adverse to looking at student accommodation. I just think what we're working works quite well. So there's no point fixing something that's not broken. But I think certainly it's an interesting and good market now. Obviously, right now, with everything going on, there's challenges in the student market, but there are challenges everywhere right now because of COVID and the situation. So I hope that helps, Jack. Hope that gives you a few tips there. Thank you so much for the question. Next question is from Dean Brindley on Facebook. Do you do any mentoring? I do mentoring, and it's more mentoring rather than training. What that means, it's really about supporting you to achieve your individual goals and objectives rather than a group program that everybody has to follow in a certain direction. It's really about, if I feel I can add value and help you to achieve your goals, that's what we're focused on. If I think I can't help, it's not something I can support with, and I'm really open and transparent about that. And I don't run any huge programs. There's small numbers of groups of people that I'll work with at any one moment in time, because for me it's important that I intimately understand and know everybody and their journey and where they are right now, rather than having groups of 50, 100 or 150 people. I know sometimes there are groups of that size for mentoring. And for more information, you just visit my website, which is sajhussain.com. There's a section there around mentoring, and that will give you some more details on that. So let's get our next question up. Next one, Khalid saying, got a question on Instagram, which I think we seem to have lost the connection, which was a Thompson, London. Hi Saj, what's the best way to work out the end value of property if there's no recent comparables or property sold on the road? So this is an interesting question. So how do you work out what something is worth, when really the most common method is to check what else is already sold and use that as a guideline, essentially a comparable or comparison, and then from that you determine what something is going to be worth. Now, occasionally you'll find a property that you're looking at and you can't find any immediate comparisons because there's nothing nearby that's sold or nothing that's sold recently. And this becomes much more tricky to try and do this. So what I would do, I'd use some guides from the estate agent. So I'd speak to the agents about what they think a property in that area might be worth, or on that street. Why they think that is the other question I would ask. And that's really important, because are they doing or are they using some other method to say, look, because we understand that this is demand, or this is typically what prices that are per square foot in the area, or whatever it is, you want to understand how are they coming to that figure. It's not just about giving a number, but what they're thinking and rationale is behind it as well. And then sometimes you can use other methods, like for instance, this is how a lot of the websites like Mouse Price and Zoopla calculate these. They use lots of figures as guides, and they're formulas really. So for instance, it might be, well, what was the property purchased at previously when it was last purchased, and how long ago was that, and how much have prices increased in that area as a percentage over time. Then they apply that to it. Now, I believe that's not really a very accurate way of doing it, but it's better than having no figures whatsoever. So it can be a little bit of a guide to help you and point you in the right direction. So that's another way you can do that. And of course, generally speaking, in this country, valuations are done based on the location of the property and the number of bedrooms. So it's a 3-bedroom property in X postcode in Birmingham, for example. That's how the valuations are done. But there are some places where square footage is what it's also based on. So it's how many square foot is the property. This tends to be more so the case in apartments, and particularly in city centre apartments. So you might be able to establish what the typical going rate is for per square foot on a property, and that might be another way to try and establish what something's worth. So I hope that helps. I hope that gives you some pointers there. So our next question is from Supercar Jude on YouTube. What would you say the baseline amount you would need to invest to make £15,000 a year income from buy-to-let method rather than rent or service accommodation? So, well, I think just thinking about your question for a moment. So you want to generate £15,000 a year. So you'd break that down. Just grab my calculator. Over a month, say that's £1,250 a month, and you've got to think about what sort of profit is it you'd be able to generate from a house typically. Let's say I'm using some crude numbers now, but just to give you an idea, let's say the rents are £800 on a property, and you're generating, say, £300 profit. Yeah, so so you're close to about 40% profit on something like that of gross rent. But let's say about 35% you're working on. So if you're making £1,250 is what you want to make as profit, then what is that as 35%? If you follow what I'm doing here, that means your rent needs to be about £3,500 a month. So if you're generating gross rent about £3,500 a month, you've got profit margin about 35%. then you'll achieve about £1,250 rental profit each month. So then it's just working backwards and seeing, okay, how many properties would that be with the average rent in your area? Let's say the average rent's for £800. So we take that 3.5 grand over £800, which is 4.5 properties. So that means between 4 to 5 properties. I'd go on the higher end because you might have some voids and stuff as well, and maintenance and things to consider. So if you've got 5 properties generating about £800 a month with a profit margin around 35% of your gross rent, that will give you £1,250 profit. And then from that, you can work out, okay, how much is each property worth? How much do I need to put as a 25% deposit? And that will give you an idea of how many houses that you need. Now, generally speaking, that will tend to be a fair few houses, which is why I chose to go down the HMO route at the beginning when I was starting, because the smaller little profits on each house, I felt I'm going to have to buy a lot of property to get comfortable, to get financially free. And really what I wanted to do was have fewer properties, much higher income on those. And ultimately, how I ended up doing HMOs, because on a HMO, it's not unusual for us to be generating £1,000 per property. And in some cases, we've got profits as high as £2,000 from a single house in terms of profit. Now, if you can do that from one house, it means you don't need a lot of properties. But we also treat it as units. So each, let's say it's a 6-bedroom HMO, we really treat that as 6 rental units because there's 6 tenants paying you rent each month. And it might be you do the same thing, but you just do it on houses. It might be lower price houses. So I got a little bit technical there with the numbers, but I hope that gives you an idea in terms of how I'm calculating it, how I'm working it out, and you can maybe apply that to what you're doing. See how you get on with that, or maybe ping me a message on social media if you're still struggling with that. So let's get our next question up. Next question's on YouTube. Sivitosalav. My sincere apologies, Mr. Milkov. I am terrible at pronouncing names. Hope you forgive me on that. Hi, Saj. Is it possible to get commercial valuation on a normal buy-to-let? It's rented out through a housing association for 30% above the rental market value, tied up a 3 to 5 year contract. So tenant is a family, not on benefits. So theoretically, this would be possible, but it really would depend on your relationship with the bank. So what I mean by that is, let's say you don't have any other buy-to-let property and this is your first buy-to-let, you're probably not going to be able to go in and get a commercial valuation on a property like that. I'm saying probably because there's so many factors that need to be considered. But let's say you have some property already, and this one property you wanted running this way. The way the valuation would work, they'd look at the strength of that lease. So who's actually taken that lease on? Who is it that's actually paying the monthly payment each month? Is it actually a housing association? Is it, I'm just going to turn some of these notifications off. So is it a housing association that's paying you, or is it another management company that's taking it on, renting it out on behalf of the housing association and then paying you? Now, if it's the housing association itself, it's what's considered a much more stronger covenant. The chances of them not paying you are very low. Whereas if it was a management company, let's say it's only been around a year or so, the chances of maybe non-payment are higher in that situation. So, you're probably more likely to struggle to get a decent valuation. But that's, in theory, that's how it would work. So they're no different from, say, if it was a shop that would be let out, who the tenant is, how much are they paying, they use a yield number and they work it out from that. But what I would say is what you're asking is not common. So I would speak to a good mortgage broker and see if they can help you with that and find a product based on your circumstances where that would work. And if you need a good broker, just ping me a message. I can connect you with a broker that may be able to help you with that. So let's get our next question on the screen. This is on YouTube, 5 Minutes Relax. I love that name. How do you secure a deal for deal sourcing? What needs to be done? Any paperwork or something else? How do you score a deal for deal sourcing? So I think what you're saying is, if you're going to pass the property on to somebody else, how do you secure it in order to do that? Well, there's a number of different ways you can do this. Think about this a little bit like an estate agent. An estate agent takes on a property on behalf of a seller and goes off and finds a buyer. And what you're doing is doing something very similar, where you're securing a property and going off to find a buyer. The only difference here is, rather than the seller paying you a fee, it's the buyer that's going to pay you a fee. But the overall principle of what an estate agent does is effectively the same thing. So you could use like an agency style agreement, which is what a typical estate agent would have, where they sign up a property, an exclusivity period to be able to sell it for a certain period of time, and they charge you a certain fee on its successful sale. So that's one method. Then you might have a lockout agreement, which is where someone's given you a period of time to be able to sell a property. You might have an option agreement, which is gives you the right to be able to purchase it, but not the obligation, but you could assign that right to somebody else. So there's a few different ways it can be done. It ultimately depends on what type of transaction it is and what's the value in that transaction as well. Because in the early days when I was sourcing property, and that was a core part of my business, there were many deals I did without actually signing up anything, any serious paperwork, let's say, with the seller. Now, I don't recommend doing it that way, but I did that because I would spend a lot of time building good rapport and trust with the seller for them to trust me to be able to go off and do this deal. Now, the risks of that is the seller changes their mind, somebody else jumps into the transaction, offers to pay more, somebody you're trying to sell the property to bypasses you, all those kind of risks are there as well. I was just careful about who I work with. Did I get my fingers burnt? Yes, it did happen a couple of times. It wasn't very often. But in short, there's a few different contracts you can use. However, the key thing you need to think about is why would the seller sign any of these agreements with you? So you've got to think about what's in it for the seller. So for instance, if you said to the seller, I've got a buyer for you, I'll get this property done within 28 days, then that might be a compelling reason for them to want to do that. If it's a case of you're saying to them, well, look, you allow me to sell this property, I'll find somebody for it, because I'm confident I'll be able to get it done in this time frame, then that's not really much different from what an estate agent would do as well. So you have to think about what's going to be in it for the seller to sign this agreement with you. And of course, when we talk about a deal, what you're doing is finding an opportunity that somebody else is going to be able to make some kind of financial benefit from, where they're going to add value to it. It's going to be BMV, they're going to convert you to different use, like a HMO or something. So you need to think about these various different things. What's in it for the seller? What's going to be in it for the buyer? And how can you make that deal work? And the paperwork just reflects that type of transaction. So I hope that helps you with that. Next one's on YouTube from Adam C. Hi Saj, how and where do I find partners? I have funds and need someone to operate deal sourcing company. I'm willing to split profits 50-50. So Adam, look, if you're looking for people to be sourcers, here's my caveat first of all on this. A lot of people claim to be sourcers. The reality is they haven't sourced anything. And no disrespect to people out there trying to build a sourcing business. Everybody has to start in the same place, which is the beginning. But some people think it's very easy. It's not easy sourcing, especially in a competitive market like we're in right now. When I first started sourcing, that was just after the last market crash, 2008, 2009, and that sort of time. The market was very, very slow. The market crashed. There were very few buyers. There were loads of deals around. So I could cherry pick out deals. And the hardest part was trying to find the buyers for those deals. Right now, the hardest part is trying to find the deals because there's no shortage of buyers. So the market changes. Market is cyclical. It moves in cycles. It's a different point in the cycle that we're in right now. Now, things might change later this year if the market slows down, which I believe it will. My gut feeling is that we will have a slowdown later this year in the market, and more opportunity will start to exist. So, for example, if when the furlough scheme finishes at the end of April, if unemployment starts to rise significantly, it will impact repossessions, debt generally. There'll just be more properties, unfortunately, for sale than there will be people looking, and then that will be a better time to be building a sourcing business. Right now, if you're sourcing, you've got to think about what is it exactly that you're sourcing. And I did a video just a few days ago, actually, on my YouTube channel, specifically around the mistakes people make when they're looking for deals. And one of the things is people are just not clear what they're looking for. Say they're sourcing. Sourcing what? What are you sourcing? So you need to be specific. You're sourcing rent-to-rents in the Birmingham area that for this many people that will suit this type of person. So you have some clarity around what you're looking for, because then when you go off looking for it, you can find it and you also match it up with the person you want to sell to. So come back to your question about finding partners. What I would do, I'd start sharing on various social media that you are looking for somebody to work with, you're looking for sources to maybe partner with. And I suspect most sources are struggling right now trying to find deals as well. There's very few sources that are good sources, that are genuine, that have been doing this for some time. I'm not saying none exist. There are some out there. But for example, the sourcing that we do, we the few properties that we find that we think are genuinely good deals, we acquire them. We don't pass them on right now. as I said, the market, if it changes later in the year, we might change that. We might start offering deals to other people as well, because the volume in the market shifts. So that's what I'd probably do. I'd particularly on Facebook groups, I'd talk and look for people who are sourcing. Then I'd ask them about the deals that they've done, how long they've been in business, what their intention are, how they want to grow. And it's a business relationship, so you want to see that you have a good connection with somebody you can work for a long term. It's not just a case of putting some money in to cover some marketing costs, for example. So let's get our next question up. This is Sama Properties on YouTube. Hi Saj, really enjoy your content. What's the best option for somebody who has around 80k equity in their property but has a low income? Thank you. So if you have equity in the property, and I'm assuming you're talking about your home, then if you remortgage that property, it'll be based on your income and your affordability. That's very, very different than, say, a traditional buy-to-let. If the equity is in a buy-to-let property, then your income is less important. It's really going to be based on the property itself and what that's worth, the rent it generates, etc., and that's what you'll be able to borrow against. If the total amount of equity is 80,000, remember, most buy-to-lets will be up to 75%, so you've got to do the calculation, i.e. what percentage of equity you have, not just a monetary amount. And if it's a residential property, you can sometimes go higher, 90% even. It's quite rare at the moment, but sometimes even higher. But as I said, it really comes down to affordability. And if you mentioned you have a low income, you might have some restrictions there in terms of what is available to you. So really, again, you need a really good mortgage broker who can review all this, look at it for you, and see how they can tap into this for you. Because ultimately, if that's what you want to do, you want to extract some of that money to use. The alternative ways, you could use that as security, or you offer a security if you're doing a purchase or you're working with somebody else, then you offer that as security. But remember, I'm not a financial advisor, but you're putting your home at risk by offering security on it if it is your home that we're talking about. So I hope that helps you with that. And our next question's on YouTube from Dan Bowie, PT. Hi Saj, I would like to know more about purchasing flats for cash that are not just tired, but also have short leases, meaning they can't be mortgaged, and extending the leases myself to sell for profit. So I think this is a great strategy. How long does the process take? How much does it cost? How long should I extend for? What risks are involved? So quite a few questions there. Let me give you a little bit of an overview on it. So the strategy essentially, what we're talking about is when you're buying apartments are generally leasehold, they're not freehold. So you're buying the property, the unit in a bigger block for a period of time. You have right to it for a period of time, and that period of time is quite a long time. Often it could be 100 years, even 125 years, or in some rare cases 999 years. But it's for a period of time that you have that property for. Now let's say it's 100 years, which is quite common, but that means in 20 years' time there'll only be 80 years left of available use you have on that property. Now there's some legal rules around, you can extend that right, etc., and that's essentially what your question is alluding to. Because what happens as that period starts to shorten, the value of the property drops as well. And when it gets to a certain point, I can't remember the numbers exactly. I won't guess because I can't remember exactly what number it is. But when the properties fall to a certain point, around 50-ish years, what will happen is that you will struggle then to get a mortgage on that property, i.e. the mortgage lender will not be happy lending for 20, 25 years, because at the end of the term, then the lease period will be even shorter than it was when you started, which means it will be worth very little. And in effect, their asset is going down in value that they're securing the money against, rather than going up in value, which is what happens with most property. So the opportunity is that you extend the lease and you extend it for another period of time, which you have the right to do. And if you purchase a property, sometimes you have to wait up to 2 years to be able to do that. The more smarter technique is that you get the seller to do it for you at the point of completion. Before you purchase it, you cover the cost to be able to do it. But it happens before you purchase it. That's been my preferred method to do this. That means you end up with an extended lease at the point of purchase rather than you purchasing it first. And sometimes you have to wait up to 2 years before you can then extend the lease to be able to get that uplift in value. In terms of what that figure is, that really does vary. If it's from the local authority, they'll have a standard formula. Really, there are specialists in this area that can kind of work out what these figures are. and the freeholders who have the right, to who you have to ask consent for to increase the lease, they do this as a business, so their intention is to make money out of it as well. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an overview on that. It is a good strategy, but it requires specialist knowledge to be able to really benefit from. I prefer to do this on houses rather than flats. So houses being ones that have a short lease on them. So either we extend the lease significantly, or we acquire the freehold, and then we force up the value at the property at the time of completion. So I hope that gives you some pointers there. Our next question is from Sam on YouTube. If I convert a garage to a habitable room, do I need to pay 5% VAT instead of 20%? If the answer is yes, is it just for the material or the contract total? Good question, Sam. One, I'm not 100% sure of. I have a mentoring group, and I do a call with them on a Monday evening before I do this live for about an hour. We're usually on that. And this question of VAT came up, and I think it's a VAT 708. If I remember correctly, I'll see if I can find it for you, that we were talking about. That's the VAT notice that you need to use to get 5%. Now, with 5% VAT, we've done this on renovations, on property, and normally what it means is that you are applying this to properties that may be empty for a couple of years, or you're converting them to or bringing them back into use because they've been empty for a couple of years, or you're converting, say, a house to a HMO. And it's a VAT notice 708 that you would use, and it goes to a contractor, and that contractor is effectively the one doing the work on the property. They are paying their normal VAT when they're buying materials, but what they're doing, they're charging you 5% on the work or the conversion that you're doing, and then they're claiming back the difference on the VAT. So that's how you benefit. In terms of whether you could do it on a garage, I'm not entirely sure. I would suggest speak to the accountant just to check for you, but I'm not entirely sure. And I believe it would be on the full project, not just part of it, i.e. not just the materials, or it's a total contract value. So I hope that gives you a couple of pointers, but I'm not entirely sure of the answer to that question. So let's get our next question up. This is on YouTube, which is ST122. What's the ideal deposit required for a property worth 200,000 for a first-time buyer, considering the COVID situation? So when you say first-time buyer, I'm assuming you mean as a home. And if it's a home, then I think it's probably about 90%. I'm not entirely sure. If it's an investment property, so a first-time buy-to-let property that you're referring to, then it would be a 25% deposit that you'd need, which is 50 grand plus the stamp duty costs. Even though there's no stamp duty, or there's stamp duty hold up to 500,000, you would still need to pay the 3%, so 6,000 in this case, if you were buying it as an investment property. But as your home, you wouldn't have any stamp duty to pay, and you'd probably you may be able to do this on a £20,000 deposit, i.e. 10%. But you do need to speak to a mortgage broker to see what products you'd be right for you, what you'd be eligible for, because ultimately with homes, they're mostly based on affordability. It's how much you're earning. It's a multiple of your earning minus your expenses, how much disposable cash you have left each month that you can use to pay towards mortgage, which is very different to how mortgages are done when it comes to buy-to-lets. An investment property, which is ultimately based on how much that property is going to generate, and are on that basis. But it does also mean on your investment properties, you've got more stamp duty to pay, and your deposits will be higher as well. So I hope that helps. We'll take one more question before we wrap up. We'll take this final question here because we're about half an hour in. I know we don't get around to answering all the questions. I give up half an hour every Monday evening to really help you and support you. I have, remember, 3 videos on my YouTube channel every week. We have this one, and we have 2 others as well. One's a vlog about the projects that I'm doing right now, that you can see what I'm up to. And also I have a video on a Wednesday which really explains certain topics. And for example, the recent one was on HMO valuations. We did this week's vlog was about, when you're sourcing property, the kind of mistakes I see people in terms of when it comes to sourcing deals. So read this content there to help you. If you're not already subscribed to the channel as well, I encourage you to go out and subscribe. I know we're multi-streaming this evening on many different platforms, but most of my content goes onto YouTube, and that's where I'd encourage you to jump on that watch as well. So let's get the last question of this evening before we wrap up. So this is a Virginia Dillon on YouTube. If there is 6 people in a 7-bedroom property, is it a 6-bed HMO or a 7-bed? We are trying to get around bridge conditions to get planning for 7-bed HMO after completion. So Virginia, when it comes to HMOs, it's about the number of occupants. I know in language we talk about it's a 7-bed HMO, it's a 6-bed, but really it's based on the number of occupants that are going to be in the property. So if you've got 6 people in the property, then essentially it's a 6-person HMO, and the valuation will be based on the 6-person HMO. If you've got a 7th room, then that 7th room is, a communal room, a storeroom, a games room, whatever it might be, but it's not going to be another bedroom for another person. Now, depending on where you are locality-wise, you might have Article 4 as well, which means you need planning permission to use it as it is. But when you go from 6 to 7, which is your question specifically, then you're changing its use from that of a C4 to sui generis. C4 is that of a small HMO, i.e. up to 6 people. And then as you go 7 and above, it falls into a sui generis classification, which of course means it goes into a different valuation category as well. You're much more likely to get a better valuation on a property like that. And that was a video I did very recently specifically on that topic about getting the valuations right. That I see so many people messing up, and it takes a lot of time, effort and money to get to the point where you're refinancing the property. And if you get it wrong, it can be so disappointing, and it can mean the difference between getting all your money out of a deal versus leaving 50, 60 grand even in a deal because you just didn't understand how this works and how to set it up correctly. So with your bridges, they're going to be asking, what is it? Is it a 6 or a 7? And if you're in, say, a non-Article 4 area, you could take a property and convert it, which is C3 to C4 as a 6-person HMO, no problem, and you can run with that. The 7th room I wouldn't worry about right now. I'd apply for planning permission afterwards once you've got it operational as a 6-person, because in my experience, it's always much easier to go from a 6-person existing HMO to a 7-person when you're making a planning application versus going from a family house to a 7-person HMO, which you tend to find there's a lot more resistance from the planners and also from the neighbours as well. So Virginia, I hope that gives you a few pointers there in terms of how you can do that. And it just leaves me to say thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you taking the time out with spending 30 minutes with me on a Monday evening. Remember, I'm here every Monday, 8:30. And if you didn't get your question answered, make sure you're here nice and early next Monday. Get your questions in nice and early, and we'll do our very best to answer those for you. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you again very soon.